All right, greetings everyone. I'm Anthony Mixer, chair of the Washington State Young Republicans Government Affairs Committee, and I am sitting down here with Senator John Braun, the minority leader in the Senate. And how are you doing today, Senator?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing great. Are we having a great opening day, or?
Well, so far so good. We're waiting on the House a little bit, but they'll catch up here in a minute.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so I just wanted to ask you real quick, what issues do you see as the priority for Senate Republicans this year?
Sure, that's a great question. And what I want to say is going to sound pretty familiar because as we talk to folks around the 20th District and my colleagues around the state, we're still hearing the same issues we worked on the last couple years, and that's public safety, affordability, education broadly. And what I mean by that is we continue to sadly break records in public safety. We just broke our homicide record for the third year in a row. That's definitely the wrong direction. We are the worst state in the country when it comes to auto theft. We have a real retail property crime issue in front of us. It's just lawlessness is how I would characterize it. And we made a little progress last year. I would say the part I'm probably pleased with and think will work in the end, although not yet, is the progress on making hard drugs illegal again, and focus on giving law enforcement the tools to get folks into treatment, hopefully back on a better path. But that's going to take a while for it to unfold. We don't have the services yet to make that work like it should. Essentially what we're asking is for municipalities and district courts to create something that looks like our current drug court, and that's going to take a while to work out. But I do think it's a reasonable path. But the other thing we worked on last year, which was the pursuit bill, we made some improvements, but frankly, they're improvements that won't make a difference, and we see that already. That the fact that we made it okay for law enforcement to pursue on violent crime, on domestic assault, homicide, that type of thing, that's important, but the truth is most of those don't result in a high-speed chase. Where we're still seeing problems is with property crime. So we have more work to do there. And I think most importantly, we have a lot of work to do to rebuild our law enforcement community. We are the worst in the country when it comes to a number of law enforcement officers per capita. We're actually 51 out of 50 because DC beats us as well. Yeah. And we don't have to be at the top, but we ought to shoot to be somewhere in the middle, and that's a big deal. It will cost a fair amount of money, but just as much a challenge is getting our best and brightest to sign up for that type of career. Right now, we're having trouble recruiting into that noble profession. So we have a lot of work to do there when it comes to affordability, whether it's food or gas, housing, childcare, healthcare, all have become increasingly unaffordable for working Washingtonians. Of course, top of mind for everybody right now is the Climate Commitment Act and the significant, gas tax, essentially a gas tax of somewhere between 40 and 60 cents, depends on where it's at. It's being added to our fuel every day, and that's compared to our neighbors in Oregon or Idaho, and it's really putting pressure on folks who are just trying to make ends meet. Especially, think about folks in our community where they may be driving longer distances to get to work. It's very hard on folks like that, where they choose to live someplace they can afford to, but they have to drive long distances to work, and now they have this significant additional cost with fuel. There's a lot of work to do on that. Housing is another big issue. But across the board, there's a ton of work. There's no silver bullet. We have, but it's about fixing and streamlining our regulatory process so that builders can come in and build an affordable rate and therefore sell an affordable rate. And that's of course true in housing, but it's also true in other parts of the economy. So a lot of work to do on affordability. And then finally, our third priority has been learning loss. We had a significant learning loss with our children during the pandemic. You see that we have not yet caught up. Even our last standardized test, we still are falling behind. 2 out of the 3 students are behind grade level in reading and arithmetic. And we aren't it's not like we've bottomed out and we're getting better. We're still having trouble. We have a lot more work to do there. But frankly, we have a lot of issues that are affecting our children around the state. Of course, K-12, but also, child care I mentioned from a cost perspective, but also from an access perspective, early education, K-12, higher ed. We have declining enrollment in higher ed, and what that means for our future is frankly unknown. But even in other areas like the juvenile justice system in Washington State right now is failing. And of course, when young folks break the law, they should be and are convicted, they should be held accountable. We also should be putting them back on a path to future success, and we aren't doing that, not even close. We're failing in our foster care system, and we're failing in our child protective services. We have another record number of small children who are dying from fentanyl overdose in our state.
Yep.
So across the board, we have a ton of work to do to make a better future for our children.
For sure. And you mentioned a lot of issues. So out of all of them, which one do you see that impacts young people the most?
Well, it kind of depends on which young people you're talking about, of course. My focus has been on K-12 public education. I think if we do that right, that opens the door for young folks for any number of fields, whether it's the trades, whether it's the university, whether it's the military. But it's critical that we get the K-12 public education system right. And right now, our biggest challenge there, of course, learning loss, but it's something of a symptom, right? It is certainly part of it is the pandemic and I think our wrong choice to keep kids out of school during the pandemic. I've talked about that over and over the last few years. But that ship has sailed. They were out of school, they got behind, but we haven't got back to getting them back on track. And really, what we see is we see the state legislature dictating curriculum over and over again, trying to be the school board and Olympian. We shouldn't do that. We should back up. We should relax the requirements on our public education system so that school boards, superintendents, principals, and ultimately teachers can do the right thing for their children. That I think is the most important. I say that, I'll go back to my first comment, that is of course true for most of our kids, but if you happen to be the young person who is trapped in the foster care system, you got lots more challenges and beyond that. That's still a challenge for you, but you still have the challenge of a stable home every evening, and we need to do a better job of that.
For sure. And so as young Republicans, our age range is about 18 through 40, so it covers a wide array of what we see to support or oppose within our generations. So how can we as young Republicans support or in some cases oppose, depending on what the legislation is, these priorities?
Well, that's a good question. And it's probably more that we can go to in detail in this discussion. But we have a list, and I'm happy to provide it, and maybe you want to talk, or you can talk separately, of bills that line up with these priorities. And I'll give you a simple example of one, and if you have an example, we can talk about it. But we talked about K-12 public education, or learning loss we experience. We have a bill this year that gets after chronic absenteeism. And what chronic absenteeism means is if you're missing more than 10% of the school days, roughly between 15 and 20 days, to get kids back in the classroom. We actually had a tough time with this even before the pandemic. We were one of the worst in the country. Now we're, I think, the very worst in the country in terms of kids missing school, and it's really exploded. Not just not going to school, but going to school but not going to class. This is, and of course, you can imagine, how do you get after learning loss if the student is in the classroom? Seems very basic, right? Mm-hmm. Seems very simple, but it's super important that we get, the data is unmistakable. When kids are in the classroom, they are demonstrably better than when they're absent a significant portion of the time. So let's start with the very basics, and we have a bill to do that. It's based on a pilot that was done by one of the education service districts over on the east side of the state that was successful in getting kids back in the classroom. So that's a simple example. It's not a particularly partisan example. It's but it's someplace where Republicans can step up and say, here we are, working on issues that affect everybody, all students day to day. How are we going to help in a real positive way? That's a simple, positive way to help get kids in the classroom, get caught up, and have a chance of a better future.
Right. And of course, our Committee of Government Affairs, we do want to try to get more young people down here to Olympia to maybe testify on bills, maybe working with lawmakers on ideas they have. Do you have any advice in that regard or anything else that young Republicans can do?
Well, I'd encourage you to connect to the Senate Republican website. There's a wealth of information there. Certainly, I also put in a plug for my newsletters and the things we put on the leadership blog. There's a lot of things that are going to give you kind of situational awareness about what's coming up. Day one, I can't tell you. Well, I can tell you what's scheduled for a hearing this week, but we don't know exactly what's going to kind of get legs. And the things that I have the biggest concern about are, of course, budget issues. First of all, our primary job in a supplemental year is to come in and adjust the operating budget, the capital budget, and the transportation budget. Operating budget is going to be the one, and that based on my background and just based on the size, it's the most important thing we're going to do here. Pay attention to that. And what I worry about is one of two things, or both things. One is that we're coming in, we have a very, very robust biennial budget. Pick your topic. We could talk about, we are among the most, fortunate in the country, if you want to think about it that way, in terms of funding to programs that help, whether it's education or social services or or corrections, whatever you pick. We are well funded. We have a surplus, and my concern is we come in a biennial year, certainly based on the governor's proposal, and we overspend when we don't need to. We need to continue to execute. So I think folks in your group could show up and say, hey, somebody's got to pay that bill eventually, and it's the taxpayers. Maybe you should hold back and just spend based on the plan before us and not add. The governor's plan would add almost $2 billion more in spending.
Yeah.
That's way too much. And the other thing that goes along with that, of course, is there's going to be some proposals that may move, and we need to watch for them to increase taxes. The two that are out there right now are ones for the real estate excise tax, and the reason that matters, and they'll say, well, what we're doing is we're just increasing it for very expensive properties, which is true, but we're already, I think, either the second or maybe the third most expensive excise tax in the country. And when they say expensive properties, you're thinking, well, that's way more than, and I think the limit is $3 million. That's way more than a regular home, sure, no problem. But what they don't think about is that captures virtually all multifamily housing. So if you're a young Republican, as an example, and you're renting right now, and those properties are sold, the cost is now much higher, therefore your rent is going to be much higher. There's a direct connection there. Mm-hmm. So we should be thinking about how these tax increases affect regular people out there and speak up and say, hey, no, I can't afford to do that. I'm having trouble right now in Washington. The other one I think that is perhaps even more damning is the increase in the property tax limit. Right now we are restricted under state law to a 1% increase in property tax, both at the local and the state level. And what they're proposing is they increase that. It's not clear whether it'll be 2.5% or 3% or based on population, but they want to raise it significantly over the 1%. And they'll say, well, it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. I hear from folks all the time about the increase in property taxes over the last few years. A lot of that has to do with assessed values. There's a lot of things that go into that. And of course, there's not one source of property taxes. There's both, there's school levies, there's other types of levies, there's state property tax. It's not one thing, but the bottom line is property tax in our state is already too high, and you increase it more than 1%, say 2.5% or 3%, it doesn't sound like a lot. And in the first year, it's not a lot. It's pretty small, but that is all compounding, right? So by the time you get out to 5 or especially 10 years, you're seeing significant increases in your property tax. And that goes to both homeowners who are paying property tax directly and renters who are generally paying property taxes indirectly through their rent.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you for sitting down with us, Senator. And for our Young Republicans group, make sure to follow the Senate Republican Caucus on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We'll have those links available in the description. And what is the website that they can go to keep up with Senate Republicans?
So it's Senate or src.com, I believe. Here, I'll give you. How about this? How about I just give you, and maybe you can flash that up there. A couple QR codes.
All right, a couple QR codes, scan those, and we'll keep in touch, Senator. Thanks for sitting down with us.
All right.